Undertale, the critically acclaimed indie RPG developed by Robert Fox, more commonly known as Toby Fox. Released in 2015, it quickly gained a massive following for its innovative approach to the usual RPG tropes. It's known for its unique bullet hell combat system, memorable characters, and seemingly endless amount of comedic flavor text. However, one character in this colorful cast stands out for their rather checkered history, a legacy that transcends the game itself. That character is who we'll be looking at today. In this video, I'll be giving you a rundown of the controversy that surrounds the character So Sorry, and hopefully through a deep dive of online confrontations, fat fur tribalism, and horrific allegations of funding a cult-like internet group, I can give you some insight as to why this character is currently rather infamous among the Undertale and Deltarune communities. But of course, we'll have to start at the place where Toby's hopes and dreams would be generously funded. On June 24th, 2013, Toby Fox launched the Kickstarter campaign for an indie game by the name of Undertale. The Kickstarter campaign had all the expected elements: the funding goal, a brief synopsis of the game, and even a playable demo to try out. But the part we're interested in are the pledge rewards, the benefits you would get in return for donating a specified amount to the project. The lower rewards were pretty standard. You could pledge $30 to get the game on launch, the soundtrack, and your name in the credits. Or you could give $75 to get that, along with physical copies and exclusive memorabilia. However, the pledges above these are where the more directly game-impacting rewards come in. For pledging $250, 10 lucky people could design an NPC for Toby to put in the game. Along with that, 2 other people, willing to donate $500 each, could instead design a fightable character. These 2 monsters being the Earthbound-inspired Glide and the Baking Spider-Girl Muffet. This, however, wasn't the highest tier of reward, as the first person willing to pledge $1,000 would be given the honor of their fan troll being a canonical character in the game. Trolls in this context are a fictional race from Homestuck, a webcomic series Toby contributed to. Given the more absurdist style of humor Undertale would go on to be known for, it would make sense for the game's Kickstarter to have a joke tier like this, much like how Homestuck itself made 2 fan trolls canon, only to introduce them in one page and kill them off in the next. However, someone would actually take Toby up on that offer, but rather than a fan troll being made canon, the character placed into the game would instead be a rather remorseful and clumsy dragon, known as So Sorry. Much like Glide, So Sorry is a monster that some players might not have even encountered during their initial playthroughs of Undertale. They have pretty specific requirements as to how you encounter them. In So Sorry's case, in the Hotlands region of the game, there's a hidden area known as the Art Club Room. In it, there's a sign telling you that the Art Club's next meeting is set for October 10th at 8 p.m. If you happen to actually wait for this time, or you knew how to change your computer's clock, reading the sign would instead start an encounter with a clumsy dragon known as So Sorry, their name being a dad joke based on the first thing they said being "I'm so sorry." The fight that ensues isn't anything too different from other fights you'll encounter in the game, So Sorry's case being an assortment of attacks, stemming not from aggression or self-defense, but from their own awkwardness, as they search for things they can use to make an apologetic gift for bumping into the player. So given that the fight itself is pretty inoffensive, and doesn't really feel that out of place given the tone of the game, what makes So Sorry stand out in a more controversial light? Well, apart from the canon fan troll benefit that got them into the game, it was actually the donor behind the character that drew in people's attention. Samuel 101, or Sam, is a non-binary furry artist from Scotland, the same furry artist who would make the pledge to the fan troll tier of Undertale's Kickstarter, making them the person behind designing So Sorry. If you were to see their Butter Dragon persona around the time of Undertale's release, named Samuel the Butter Dragon, you'd be pretty quick to notice how similar their appearance is to that of So Sorry's. This wasn't by mistake. as So Sorry is based pretty heavily off of Samuel's persona, just with a few adjustments made to obscure the connection between the backer and the monster, for reasons we'll get to in a moment. So now we go to Undertale's release back in September of 2015. With the game being out, you're probably wondering how long it took players to discover So Sorry. Well, with the internet being the internet, it didn't take very long for players to find the hidden monster. And when they did, it wasn't much longer until they drew the connection between So Sorry and Samuel. When that connection was discovered, quite a few players would send harassment and hate towards Samuel, due to the inclusion of their character in the game, regardless of how obscure their appearance was. The question you're probably wondering is why Samuel's inclusion in the game would draw so much vitriol their way. Or you're probably just assuming it's because of them being a furry, as the general internet wasn't exactly the kindest to furries back in 2015. And you'd be half right for thinking that. You see, Sam wasn't just a furry artist. They were a fat fur furry artist. A fat fur is pretty much exactly what it says on the tin. A furry with a specific interest in heavier characters, ranging from chubby to far beyond the realistically possible. I personally don't understand it myself, but then again, I don't think I'm really one to judge. Fat fur was a constant theme in most of Sam's artwork, from soft or hardcore vor to the more common theme of weight gain, sometimes to the point where a character's body could no longer contain its expanding organs. So what does this have to do with Undertale? Well, Undertale released on September 15th, 2015, and to the surprise of very few, it didn't take very long for people to find out about the person behind So Sorry, 4chan users being the first to figure out and spread that connection, according to Sam themselves. Despite the source, Sam's inclusion in the game would bring their personal interest to the front and center of the discussion. The reception to this new information was somewhat divided. Some players took issue with what they saw as Sam's self-insert being placed in the game for general audiences, especially given the mature nature of the artwork associated with their online persona. However, there were also sentiments of players who didn't find issue with the inclusion, because not only did So Sorry not bring any fetish material into the game itself, but their inclusion was obscure enough that you would only find them on a specific day during a specific hour. You wouldn't run into them unless you were actively searching for them, leaving very little chance you'd accidentally happen to come across them. Regardless of that split in opinion, Sam would receive a pretty hefty amount of scrutiny, hate, and harassment following their inclusion in Undertale. Harassment that resulted in Samuel releasing a statement on Tumblr concerning it. On October 23, 2015, Samuel posted a Tumblr statement addressing the inclusion of So Sorry in Undertale. Sam would start the statement by confirming that they were in fact the fan troll. They mentioned how they were initially going to pledge the $500 tier, but deciding to pledge to the joke tier due to their enjoyment of the demo. This is then followed by Sam giving details on how he and Toby collaborated to design the character, such as Toby finding out about Sam's online footprint pretty early on. Sam emphasizes how even though they do consider their artwork to be an extension of their identity, they didn't want their interest to impact the game, hence no mention of fetish in Undertale. At least not on launch, but we're not there yet. Toby evidently wanted the same, as he would ask Sam if it was okay for him to obscure the connection between Samuel's Sona and the character that would be So Sorry. Their goal was to keep the game as a self-contained universe, and to prevent players from seeing Samuel's persona, looking them up online, and immediately being confronted with their niche artwork. Pretty similar to how Toby asked his Tumblr community not to use Undertale's main tag when posting sexual fan art of the game. This ended up happening regardless, resulting in that obscuring leading to rumors that Toby made So Sorry a secret because he supposedly hated Samuel, something that couldn't be further from the truth. Sam didn't seem to mind Toby making these changes though, as they understood Toby not wanting fetish content to be something directly associated in the game. However, the more major physical altercations Toby suggested are where Sam started to feel a bit weird, as the character was still a part of Sam's identity after all. There's then a section talking about how a lot of people compared So Sorry's inclusion to that of Muffet's, Sam stating that they find the comparison a bit weird. This isn't that important to mention at the current moment, but keep that comparison in mind as we go forward. In the end, Samuel would state how happy they were with how So Sorry turned out, despite the critique and harassment they had received due to their inclusion, saying, "Nobody has to look at my work just because I'm in the game. I know my stuff is not for everyone, hence I keep it to the sites I post on, and I'm not offended if people don't like it. My work has no bearing on any discussion of the game though. My interests don't touch the game, only my identity, and I'm happy to keep it that way." The statement ended with Sam thanking the people who were supportive of them, leaving the discussion of So Sorry to stagnate for the time being, as there doesn't seem to be much discussion concerning So Sorry, at least not until later in the following year, where Sam would be singing a bit of a different tune. April 20th, 2016, Sam would post a tweet thread claiming that Toby cared more about making So Sorry a secret than So Sorry being a cool secret, and that Toby not making a public statement about their harassment made them feel isolated and hurt. I could only find a screenshot of the thread's TLDR tweet, but thankfully Sam would repost it on their Tumblr the following day, presenting it as an addendum to their initial 2015 statement. According to Samuel, Toby was initially cool with the inclusion of Sam's character, saying nice things about Sam and agreeing to a unique room, encounter, and NPC for their pledge contribution. However, at some point, someone had contacted Toby about Sam's online identity, and from there, Toby would pull support. In Sam's words, "Firstly, he was cool with me, loved my character, said nice things about me, agreed to a unique room, an encounter, a battle, and NPC. Then someone said, 'Hey, Sam's a freak by the way.' I never was told who, only that someone brought it up to him. Ever after, it's been pain. Now, unique area, NPC, boss fights, encounter, all that stuff went to another backer, who I've since been told is his friend." The backer in question here would be Michelle Tchaikovsky, creator of webcomic Ava's Demon, and the Kickstarter backer who designed Muffet, who, again, we'll get to in a moment. Back to the addendum, near the end of development, Toby would contact Sam after going relatively silent for 2 years, asking if Sam would be fine if he were to scrap So Sorry and refund Samuel's pledge. Sam would decline the offer, calling the offer real unfair. They repeat the sentiment that they believe Toby's focus was more on keeping So Sorry as a secret rather than making them an interesting inclusion. The section is followed by Sam expressing how this experience has taken an emotional toll on them, describing feelings of isolation, dehumanization, and betrayal, continuing by saying, "Going forward, I don't know what to do now. I don't think I can talk to Toby about it any more than I already have. It hurts too much. I didn't want a refund, I just wanted to be involved in something that made me feel powerful emotions and give what I could back." The following day, Toby would post a response on Tumblr titled "About Sam/So Sorry." In this response, Toby would stand up for Samuel, expressing disappointment towards those directing hate towards them. He explains, "Undertale is basically a game about accepting and befriending people that are different than you. Everyone has the right to like or dislike anything they want, but there's no reason to turn your dislike into a personal attack." Sam's inclusion was a result of his honest support for a game he really cares about, which all of you care about as well, and I accepted that inclusion. So Sorry is as much a part of Undertale as anything else. Toby would explain why he didn't comment publicly on the hate Sam received, and apologized for not speaking up sooner, explaining that he believed bringing attention to that harassment would just incite more harassment, but realizes that his silence had resulted in that occurring regardless. He then talks about the refund he offered, promising that his decision to offer Sam a refund was made with good intentions, saying that the potential harassment was the reason he offered it, adding that he even asked if Sam wanted to use a different character in his persona's place. The statement ended with Toby calling on the community to keep from directing hate towards Samuel, as the two have talked to one another and were now cool. This sentiment was shared with Samuel, who would post their own conclusion the next day. Following the two's discussion, Sam found that there wasn't anyone to place blame on in this situation, but that the situation came down to a breakdown in communication. Sam mistakenly believing that Toby was unwilling to protect them, and that the effort to prevent Sam coming under attack had left them more vulnerable to it. While this seems contradictory, Sam acknowledged that this mindset was driven more by fear than anything else. By the release of this statement, Sam had forgiven Toby and acknowledged that their actions were made with compassion, not embarrassment. They further clarified to their followers that Toby isn't a bad person, and urges them not to view him harshly over this occurrence. This is where Samuel bids the So Sorry situation farewell, concluding by asking everyone to be kind to one another, and thanking everyone for bearing with them, saying that they feel safe again and can go back to loving Undertale wholeheartedly, closing the book on all this stress the situation had brought them. For the time being, October 31st, 2018, Toby Fox would release the first chapter of Undertale's follow-up title, Deltarune. Something that still feels weird to say out loud. Like, Undertale's about to turn 10, what do you mean Deltarune is 6 now? Well, anyway, around the month of Deltarune's release, one could find a Twitter thread from Samuel posted on November 29th, in which Samuel discussed a concern about the game, specifically its absence of So Sorry. The thread begins with, "So I bit the bullet and asked, plans of the moment are no second art club. So Sorry will not return." This was then followed by a pretty lengthy Twitter thread where Sam rants about the lasting hurt they feel following the derogatory remarks they got due to their inclusion in the first game. There's a lot of self-deprecation in this thread, deprecation that we've seen previously. Quotes like, "I'm sorry I'm too much of a freak to treat nice the first time. I'm autistic. I've been this weird shape of person as long as I can remember. I have to fight to be seen as acceptable, but that's a fight I could never win. My anxieties are only ever reaffirmed. I'm physically unacceptable. I'm mentally aberrant. There really isn't a place I can fit in. Even the nicest people would never want to be seen next to me. There's no real point to me, haha." They do remind everyone later in the thread that yes, they spoke to Toby about it, but that it took a long time to get to that point, and that it doesn't just erase the pain of being told I was nice and cute, and then, oh no, not you. They add to the thread 2 days later, clarifying that they're not demanding they'd be included in Deltarune, saying, "People have been asking me and sounding hopeful that So Sorry would show up again. I was hopeful too. I had very bad experiences last time that kinda undermined the moral of the game, so I asked if there'd be a second chance." In the replies, a furry artist would mention that Samuel shouldn't be taking the non-inclusion of So Sorry as a personal slight against them, as Muffet, another backer character, hasn't made an appearance in Deltarune either. They responded to this by saying that she wasn't a backer character, because apparently around this time, information concerning who the actual backer characters were was muddied. It's unclear how this became a point of confusion, as the game's credits list Washua as inspired by Omocat, right alongside Muffet. There's also the fact of Samuel claiming before that the backer rewards meant for So Sorry were given to another backer instead, and Washua didn't receive any of those listed benefits. Now, it appears that post would stay within Samuel's orbit, not getting too much outer traction, unlike a post they would make almost 2 years later. In August of 2020, there was a Twitter post for people to share confessions that would get your Undertale card revoked. One of the quote tweets on this post would be from Samuel, where they lamented about how they were treated due to Undertale, and how they still had complicated feelings about how Toby and others who worked on the game had treated them. It reads, "How I was treated by the creators still stings and has left me with complicated and stressful feelings to what is otherwise my favorite pair of games thus far. I don't think they're bad people, and I think they made one of the most important, iconic, and enduring games of the 2010s, but I had to fight for 2 years to have an appearance that was reshaped, cut down, and hidden because I'm the wrong kind of monster for a game about compassion. I had to fight all the way up to release, and even then wasn't given a name in the design credits like the others were. That came much later, possibly on the Switch release. It should be noted that Samuel seems to be referring to the true ending credits here, as So Sorry doesn't appear there. However, Samuel was listed in the neutral ending credits under Other Monster Designs, right besides Mike Reed, the backer who designed Glide, another monster that doesn't appear in the true end credits. I was told that it was for my own good, as though I don't know what's good for me. I'm queer, I'm autistic, I'm fat and draw fat cartoons. I've been bullied my whole life. I just wanted to be a part of something I cared about for once, and that wasn't allowed to be nice. If people are fine with Alpheus, who has a lot of similar traits to me, they can be fine with me. Anything else admits a lack of sincerity. Later in the thread, they talk about how despite there being a number of people who were very cruel to them, that there was a number of people who showed them support, especially in the Japanese portion of the community. They end the thread by, again, saying that So Sorry won't be reappearing in Deltarune, but they did make their own Deltarune version of them when they were going through some stuff. Now, while this thread seemed to be pretty positively accepted, there was still a number of users who had differing opinions on the topic, expressing that Toby isn't at fault for Sam's buyer's remorse, or the negative outcome that resulted due to So Sorry's addition, as Toby took whatever precautions they could to avoid Sam getting bullied and harassed for their inclusion, only for it to happen anyways regardless of those precautions. This perspective offers a bit more of a balanced look at the situation. We can agree that the harassment Sam received due to their inclusion in the game was unwarranted, while also acknowledging that Toby tried to prevent as much of it as he realistically could when the offer for a refund was declined. Regardless, 2020 marked the beginning of a turning point in So Sorry's reputation. Hate and disdain for the character would seemingly melt into the background, as the community came together and believed that what happened to Samuel was unfortunate. Granted, not everyone had the full story back then, as I believe Samuel had deleted their addendum and conclusion statements sometime during or after 2020. Mind you, this is an estimate. I'm basing it on the fact that the Wayback Machine doesn't have any usable archives of these two posts after 2020. But the fact they were deleted at all had effectively obscured the previous details of what happened, for anyone not interested enough to deep dive into it themselves. Now, speaking of obscure details, I feel that before we move on here, there are a few details that are pretty important to the full discussion of So Sorry. That being statements from Samuel's friend group of primarily fat fur artists. Looking through their statements, I believe they can provide us some insight on future information in this timeline. Among Samuel's friend group, there appears to be a consensus that Samuel pretty much got screwed over by Toby, only acting to denounce the hate against Sam when he got enough pressure sent his way. This can be inferred from a number of tweets they would leave between Deltarune's Chapter 1 and 2 releases, starting off with a fat fur under the handle Cato Plepis, or Cato as I'll be referring to them moving forward. They're a rather prominent person of note in Samuel's group, as they would be one of the few friends to announce having a part in the creation of So Sorry. In 2021, they can be found claiming to be a middleman for Samuel, having handled the email communication between them and Toby. Along with that, he would also be seen claiming that Toby had the idea to hide So Sorry as a way to avoid the backlash of their inclusion. Now, you might be confused as to why they're saying this in April of 2021, when in 2016, Toby had directly told Sam that wasn't the case. However, according to Cato, Toby only had this conversation with Sam and made a public statement on the matter after months and months of emails from Cato asking him to do something. A statement that would seem to shed a new light on Toby changing his belief that being silent would result in less harassment being received. Another associate of note would be one with the user handle Adorablimp. I mention Adorablimp as he repeated the claim that Toby was intended to have their own in-game area, but Toby reduced it due to criticism during development regarding Sam's inclusion. This aligns with what Sam had alluded to in their past addendum. Additionally, Adora Blimp appears to have a bit of an axe to grind with Muffet, particularly her designer, Michelle, because during their defense of Samuel in both 2020 and 2021, something that he would constantly bring up during this defense would be the allegations that Michelle drew porn of one of the minor characters in their webcomic. However, Adora Blimp would push these allegations as facts with evidence, mentioning how this wasn't on the same level as drawing a fat dragon. Now, to properly explain where I'm going with this, allow me to give a brief rundown of these allegations, something that was a bit harder to do than I thought given just how little documentation there actually was of these claims. So, as mentioned before, Muffet's backer, Michelle, is primarily known for their webcomic Ava's Demon. Sometime in 2015, Michelle drew art of one of their characters named Maggie in a slightly transparent dress. The reason this piece became one of issue is because Maggie is listed as being canonically 15 years old, and based on the wiki, I can't seem to find if they aged throughout the 3,000-page series, being roughly 1,500 around the time this drama happened. Regardless, this piece would get Michelle labeled as a pedophile that drew porn of a minor character. Something that, even though I myself would have advised against them doing, still feels a bit overkill. However, the only thing close to a response I could find from Michelle was a piece they posted afterwards. Another art piece of Maggie, this time with more pronounced artistic nudity. Effectively a doubling down that they believe the original piece was fine. From here, there doesn't seem to be any other information, anything tangible at least. I can understand whoever's watching this probably has their own line as to what art is okay or not. I mean, personally, I'm against the creation of these pieces myself, as I think in most contexts you probably shouldn't draw artwork depicting a minor's nude figure, even artistically so. But speaking objectively, given the pieces aren't inherently sexual, and Michelle wouldn't have a similar controversy occur since this happened, I feel pretty safe in stating that Michelle isn't a pedophile, just someone whose past decisions weren't all that morally agreeable. Now, this is all to explain that despite my own gripes with their actions from 10 years ago, saying that Michelle was drawing porn of an underage character comes off as objectively incorrect, and in Adora Blimp's case, could be interpreted as disingenuous. I'm basing this claim on two things. One being that Adora Blimp only seemed to swing these allegations around to make Samuel look better by making Michelle look worse. But also, his spreading of these flimsy claims reads as a hypocritical move given their blind defense of someone in their space who had very similar allegations levied against them around this time, that person being Kato. In 2021, it was alleged that Kato had not only made fetish art of a minor's persona, but he would also encourage them to gain weight and ask to see pictures of their gut, all while they were 14. The minor claims they anonymously came out with this information before, but Kato urged them into taking it down, deciding to come out with the information again after seeing a post from Kato lamenting that people were holding a phony call-out post over his head for clout. Kato would address these allegations by claiming they didn't know the minor was underage. This being said, despite there being messages between the two where he says he tried to steer them away from getting groomed. Now, as these grooming allegations are from nearly 4 years ago, it would only be fair of me to extend Kato the same courtesy I did Michelle, despite the more damning circumstances. It is possible that Kato has learned and grown from this mistake, as I've yet to see anything that would lead me to believe otherwise. Granted, given my reason for mentioning these allegations, I do find myself being a bit skeptical. As I said before, Adora Blimp could be seen constantly spreading allegations against Michelle as if they were fact, this being done primarily for the defense of Samuel's reputation. And yet, as they're parading this scuffed information around, there are allegations being pushed against an associate of his with damning evidence behind it, something he would attempt to undermine by saying that the accuser couldn't be trusted. Because the person who made the anonymous callout at first wasn't the victim who came out with the info later, but someone acting in the interest of that victim. I mentioned this behavior because it becomes a recurring theme in this story. Although I can't definitively state this was a widespread sentiment within the fat fur community, The particular group of fat furs Samuel was involved with appeared intensely protective of their members. They were quick to suppress and villainize the views of any that were critical of their ranks, ensuring such information was swiftly swept under the carpet. Alternatively, any information detrimental to their opposition was to be upheld as if it were gospel. This is behavior that can certainly be seen as we head deeper into the timeline of So Sorry. I need to remind you, public opinion of So Sorry had pretty much fully turned in favor of Samuel and So Sorry back in 2021. More and more members of the Undertale and Deltarune communities saw Samuel as a kind person who had been harassed because of their unconventional artistic interests. And at this point in time, that was still the basis of the story. For years after Undertale's release, So Sorry was seen as just an endearing inclusion from someone who loved Undertale and wanted to pitch in however they could. I mean, in the Switch release of Undertale, they would give So Sorry added dialogue in the Pacifist Route's epilogue, where they straight up just make a joke alluding to Samuel's fat fur interests. While people still had their gripes, the community at large was pretty accepting of their inclusion. So why were people rescinding their support in 2024? Well, to understand that shift, we need to look away from Undertale and check out a different, far more darker corner of the internet that Samuel was deeply involved in. We need to look into a group known as Floraverse. The story of Floraverse is a very, very extensive one. A story of a cult-like roleplay group on the internet known for minor predation and predator protection. The things that have happened within this group are worthy of their own extensive coverage, but for the time being, I'll give you a short summary as to why Floraverse and its leaders are as infamous as they are. So, the main people involved at the head of Floraverse are Glitched Puppet, also known as Glip, Glip's wife, known as Evie, and Glip's ex-husband, known as Marl. Glip is a webcomic artist with a self-admitted grooming fetish. In the past decade, they've exposed multiple minors to Pokemon and furry pornography with themes of rape, pedophilia, and incest by conflating sexual content with their works. Both their Pokemon Mystery Dungeon explores DeviantArt roleplay group, the titular webcomic Floraverse, and its pornographic counterpart, Forbidden Flora. Works that housed primarily teenage audiences. Glip had no issue discussing sexual topics through their Tumblr blog with. Evie is someone known for their past defense of bestiality, arguing that animals humping your leg means they consent, as well as claiming to know people who identified as zoophiles themselves. Evie could also be found saying it's fine to expose minors to sexual spaces, and even platforming arguments in favor of legalizing CSAM, saying they weren't sure, they disagreed. Lastly, Marl is someone known as a pedophilic and zoophilic predator. There have been multiple testimonies that speak of him sexually preying on both minors and animals, even going so far as to try and get a minor to engage in bestiality, with intent to solicit the recording. To give you an example of just how depraved this group was, in March of 2014, one teenage victim named Lane accused Marl of messaging her images of dog genitalia, continuing sexual conversations with them, even after knowing they were only 13 at the time. Glip and Evie would defend Marl from this and other similar allegations, despite the two being aware of the kind of person Marl is. They would weaponize their platforms to harass victims for coming out with their stories. They would spend years smearing Lane as a reverse predator, a minor trying to lure men into a CP charge. The group claimed to have evidence of Lane being a temptress teenager, but they never did end up showing it. Regardless, they would constantly try to defend Marl, while tripping over their own stories in the process. They would claim the pedozoo allegations were all lies, while also having a video of the group's family dog posted online. In the video, their dog, named Apollo, can be seen wearing mittens on only their front paws. This is said to be something that's done to dogs trained in bestiality so that they won't scratch the human they're mounting. They've addressed this by saying that the mittens were due to their dog having trouble getting traction on their house's uncarpeted floors. Both of them feigned ignorance about the actual purpose of this, despite them both dabbling in zoophilia in their past. As said before, Evie can be seen arguing that she believes bestiality is ethical, while stating she's known zoophiles herself. And in Glip's case, not only have they claimed that their cat Twigs would sometimes lick their genitalia, something that seemed to happen enough times for Marl to get jealous of the cat, but when Glip would later divorce Marl for being into bestiality, they would also allege that Marl had previously convinced them into being filmed having sex with someone's dog so he could solicit it for money. Twice. Mind you, according to Glip, this supposedly happened years before Marl came into contact with Lane, so apparently Marl coerced Glip into screwing dogs on camera, yet they didn't pick up on him being into bestiality, nor did they see the signs he could possibly be abusing their own dog. Instead, they spent years crafting a bizarre narrative that portrayed his victims as manipulative, underage sirens, luring vulnerable men into looking like pedophiles. Now, believe it or not, that was the briefest retelling I could manage. There is a lot more that goes into the cult-like reputation Floraverse has amassed over the past decade. However, I believe I gave enough of a reason why even just associating with the property, or the people involved in it, would be as frowned upon as it is. So now that we've gone over that, let's touch on the obvious question. What does Floraverse have to do with Samuel exactly? Well, looking back as far as 2020, you can see them making an OC, appearing similar to his own Sona, but in the style of Floraverse. We can even see interactions between Sam and both Glip and Evie. Seeing this, we can tell that Sam was, at the very least, active in Floraverse circles. This in itself isn't something that's immediately damning, as there was always the possibility of them just not being aware of what allegations and wrongdoing are being levied towards the group. However, Samuel had unfortunately put themselves in a situation where it would be near impossible for them to feign ignorance. You see, Samuel isn't just a member of the Floraverse community. They're an administrator of their Discord server, who was, and still might be, willingly funding said group. Sam's history paints them as a rather large financial contributor to the group. There are testimonies from past moderators that speak of Sam being a rather frequent commissioner of Glip. Not only would they constantly boost the Floraverse Discord server they were an administrator for, numerous times, but their roles in this server also showed them pledging to the highest tiers on both the Glitched Puppets and Forbidden Flora Patreons. Now, you might have noticed that I said Sam's interactions with Floraverse and its leaders spanned back to 2020. So why did this connection only get brought into the spotlight 4 years later? On April 8th, 2024, a user would make a tweet that read, "I think now that the Undertale fandom has matured, we should be more open to making art of So Sorry. Creator isn't even problematic." They would retract their stance hours later, attaching an image from a callout post, bringing attention to Samuel's connection to Floraverse. This very post is what would launch these allegations out into the wider public. More people now aware of the news that So Sorry's backer was bankrolling a Zoopetto cult. It became so mainstream that a member of the Fat Fur community, known as Gothgator, would use the opportunity to speak out about Samuel and Floraverse, creating a Twitter thread where they detail allegations of how their close friends and family were groomed by members of the Floraverse group. Unfortunately, this would occur around the time Twitter made a number of API changes that would make modern tweet archival a pain in the ass. So Gothgator's Twitter thread couldn't be properly archived before they would delete their Twitter account, saying that they couldn't withstand the amount of harassment and death threats they received upon speaking out. While I was unable to find tangible evidence of these threats, what could be found were reactions from Fat Furs in the community, specifically from friends and associates of Samuel. Allow me to use a few examples. A Fat Fur by the name of Dear Fats reacted to the thread with the opinion that Gothgator should forgive the people they're calling out for grooming and abuse, because speaking up against someone out of anger will just make everyone involved miserable. Even the alleged groomers, I guess. There was also the user Round Rams, who didn't agree that Floraverse was a cult and argued that it would be healthier for Goth to cut off Floraverse and Sam rather than calling them out, which makes sense in a vacuum. It would be sensible to cut off your abuser, but that wouldn't exactly stop the potential grooming and abuse from happening to others in their stead. As we've established, Gothgator's friends and family weren't the only victims of Floraverse. There were many more people who have been exposed to inappropriate material and worse because of this group. Goth was given the opportunity to bring attention to someone in their community financially supporting that group. Personally, I can perfectly understand why they took the opportunity they did. Regardless, you would still have responses from Samuel's circle that, pardon my cynicism, begin to reek of a masterclass in weaponized wellness. A barrage of toxic positivity, much like a thread from a fat fur named Laura, also known as Koboldium. The thread reads, "I think some people are in major need of realizing that it's still harassment if it happens to someone they don't like. We can't be so fucking two-faced about it where doing cruel things is good because we think it's the right thing to do. I've been there. I've done callouts on people. I thought I was doing the right thing, but it only rocked the boat with a one-sided part of an argument. Mind you, the right thing in the specific situation is calling someone out for financially supporting a group with a documented history of cult-like abuse and grooming. There was, and still is, an entire website dedicated to keeping all of these events documented, literally called floraverseisaCult.com. And speaking of Floraverse, some might notice just how vague this thread is. How there isn't a single mention or nod towards the group or the allegations in this entire thread. The goal here wasn't a dialogue. It was damage control. Silence the accuser, muddy the waters, and make sure the allegations fade into the background noise of the internet, even if it means some making complete fools of themselves. Like when Adora Blimp would return and make a thread attempting to portray Goth as a liar who can't keep their story straight. How would he do this? Fucking pronouns. In one tweet, his cousin was molested by his father. In another, the cousin's pronouns are she and they. Is it possible they transitioned between these two tweets? Sure. Or he forgot what his lie was. This flawless logic panned over as well as you'd think it would. But one thing I will agree with Koboldium on is that these situations shouldn't be so one-sided. It only makes sense that we wait for Samuel to give their part of the story. So, what did Samuel have to say about these allegations? Well, the only public word they would give on this was a single tweet that read, "I'm hearing that a lot of harmful misinformation is spreading about a community I hang out in. I will be clear and to the point. Floraverse does not condone zoo or pedophilia at all. Consent is taken very seriously there. Folks have been banned for violating this. They just dismissed the allegations as false, despite the meticulous documentation that tells a much different story. Despite the former moderators alleging that these acts were still happening around this time. But regardless, most of the damage control was being done in private. Not directly by Samuel, mind you, but presumably by other members of the Fat Fur community. As I said, they would effectively run Gothgator off of the internet due to speaking out against Samuel's behavior, sending him death threats such as gory images of suicide victims, the harassers telling him to follow suit, and with Gothgator deleting their public internet presence due to this, things would go back to business as usual in the public Fat Fur community. Samuel's involvement in Floraverse would be, for the most part, swept under the carpet, despite a number of Fat Furs voicing their disappointment with this information being disregarded so willingly. Since the Gothgator controversy occurred, this information has seemingly faded into obscurity, being brought up on occasions similar to a trivia fact whenever someone happens to mention something relating to So Sorry, this being the case in June of 2025, following the release of Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4. For the unaware, in Deltarune, there are secret rooms that the player has a small chance of naturally accessing in a specific area of each chapter. These are known by most as egg rooms, because of these areas being Easter eggs, also because you can find an egg inside them. There are only one of these rooms in each chapter, so they're quite difficult to find if you don't know what to look for, or even if they exist. Now, you might remember back in 2018 how Samuel had stated that they spoke to Toby and found out that they had no plans for So Sorry to make a return in Deltarune. However, in the egg room of chapter 4, there would seem to be a reference to the character, if it wasn't just them. In a dark area of the room, you can interact with an unseen NPC that says the following dialogue. "Oh, I'm sorry. I was so into drawing I didn't notice you. Are you here for art club? Right. This is where we draw pictures and don't kill each other. What am I drawing? Oh, don't look. I'm not finished yet." On its own, this probably just seems like a coincidence. However, you can interact with them again to get a second set of dialogue. How did I get here? I can't say I remember. I was in such a rush I didn't look where I was going at all. While we can't say for certain the NPC saying this is So Sorry, as we just can't see who's saying it, I personally think it would be a safe bet to assume it is, given that this text is pretty directly referencing his appearance in Undertale, where their fight initiates by accidentally rushing into the player in the art club room. Even finding this dialogue in an Easter egg you need to have prior knowledge of to locate feels pretty on brand for So Sorry given their placement in the prior game. But because we can't see them, and because this would be the first appearance of any backer design character, I can't 100% confirm this to be the case. I can only go about 90. Now, let's say that this does turn out to be So Sorry. Does that mean Toby made the conscious decision to include the character Samuel designed, but obscure their appearance so there'd be plausible deniability should Toby get flack? Well, no. This alone doesn't really prove that Toby's aware of Sam's history of supporting Floraverse, nor does he seem to be aware of Floraverse in general. It should be remembered that regardless of their similarities, So Sorry is still logistically considered to be a separate character from Sam's own persona. And much like So Sorry, Toby placed the possible Deltarune counterpart as an Easter egg that most have to go out of their way to access. And it also is possible that So Sorry was the only guest designed character Toby was able to bring over from Undertale, but given that chapter 4 also has an obscure reference to Muffet and her bake sale, I wouldn't really bet on that. That being said, where the fuck is Glide, Toby? So while it's been accepted by a number of players that this is indeed So Sorry returning, to say that this inclusion means that Toby is doing this while aware of Sam's more heinous actions wouldn't be a correct assessment. And speaking of So Sorry in the current day, if we look at what's going on with Samuel at the current moment, there isn't much that would really sway current opinion one way or the other. In regards to So Sorry the character, we can see Samuel talking about Deltarune and making a ref sheet for So Sorry, as their way to separate them from their own current Sona. In regards to the controversy that was left behind in 2024, they would end up making a somewhat recent thread over on Blue Sky concerning it. It's a thread that contains most of the themes we've already come to expect from Samuel, so I don't really see a reason to go in depth with it. But the gist of this thread is Sam portraying the Gothgator situation in a much more different light than what had occurred. Rather than being someone who wanted Sam to denounce Floraverse and take accountability for financially supporting the group, Goth was now someone whose main goal was to get Sam to leave the internet. The same internet that allowed them to make friends and find love. Because don't forget, they're disabled, have crippling anxiety, and are also trans. The same tried and true pattern of self-deprecation. However, they would end up deviating from that pattern just a bit. They would follow that up by saying that they would like the people who have hurt them to openly acknowledge the hurt they've brought them and publicly apologize. A statement that becomes all the more infuriating when you realize this thread is just a toxically positive attempt at rewriting the narrative of those past allegations. Never mentioning Goth or Floraverse by name because then, they'd have to address those allegations head on, resulting in drama as more people find out about their connection to Floraverse, as if they even attempt to hide it over on Blue Sky. I say that because around late June, we would see Glitched Puppet upload art they made of So Sorry for Samuel, the response visible in the replies. Along with that, they are also still in the Floraverse Discord. still possessing their placement on the floraverse staff. But as these two have moved away from Twitter and over to Blue Sky, where the connection is hardly touched on, I think it's safe to say that the story of So Sorry, while tainted by the creator behind it, is still seen as a simple footnote of Undertale's history, a side story that people don't really find themselves recalling all too often. The story of So Sorry began as a messy but relatively straightforward tale of conflict and harassment. The story of a fan that was bullied for their artistic interest and identity after making a hefty contribution to a game they fell in love with. This part of the story is still correct, and the harassment they received over simply being a fatfer was indeed wrong. But unfortunately, this wasn't where the story would end. Over the course of a decade, that narrative of victimhood was manipulated. A public resolution with the game's creator was erased from the record to preserve a more convenient tale of persecution. A tale that was then weaponized, used as a shield to deflect any and all accountability for something far more serious: their active, administrative, and financial support for Floraverse. When a victim would speak out, alleging real-world grooming and abuse within that community, they weren't met with the same compassion Samuel had once demanded for themselves. They were met with a coordinated campaign of silencing and harassment, orchestrated by the very same people who had spent years defending Samuel. Due to the actions of Samuel and their associates, the story of So Sorry is no longer about a bullied and harassed fan. It's become a cautionary tale about the dangers of narrative control, tribalism, and how the mantle of victimhood can be used to enable and protect alleged predators. It's almost poetically ironic when you think about it. So Sorry, a clumsy and apologetic dragon, has become the legacy of a creator who, when faced with credible accusations of their own complicity in something genuinely harmful, couldn't even muster a simple apology. In fact, based on all the available evidence, Samuel appears to be so very unsorry. That's about it from me. Stay safe out there.
Funding for this program was made possible by